Superstitions. Most of us have them for one reason or another. Many of the superstitions we have today are, like so many other things, leftovers from the Victorian era. Given their fear of the number 13, we find it absolutely appropriate to share our top 13 favorite Victorian superstitions. Mirrors were quite expensive until the Industrial Revolution, and their ability to portray a clear image of reality was probably mesmerizing. If you add how right to left is shifted to left to right, it makes sense that people thought it to be a mystical device. Mirrors seem to capture the soul, and to break one, especially one that has just been holding your image, was thought to invite bad luck. If one fell off the wall and broke, it was believed someone would soon die. Speaking of death after a member of a household died, the mirrors were covered with a veil or crepe to keep the deceased spirit from being trapped in them. Mirror scrying also became really popular as well, as Victorians were really interested in the occult. Salt for centuries was important, and not just for seasoning, but also for its power of preservation and protection. Spilling salt was considered bad luck, but if you tossed some over your left shoulder with your right hand, it reversed it. It was thought that it would blind the devil who was waiting to tempt you into naughty, naughty acts. Oftentimes, clocks will in fact stop at the time of a disaster, and that, in and of itself, is something many lovers of the macabre find fascinating. Even haunted houses have their own tricks with clocks that have been observed by many. Now, Victorians believed the clock didn't stop at the moment of death, at the loss of a family member. It was the duty of the family to stop all the clocks in the house. Not doing it was considered disrespectful of the dead and would invite misfortune. After the deceased was buried, the clocks would be restarted again. Victorians were fairly in a constant state of mourning. They believed if there were 2 deaths in the family, one more was sure to follow. This might be why, even now, when something bad is happening in succession, you might still hear someone say, "It always happens in 3s." There are many superstitions for funeral processions and proper cemetery behavior, and many relate to rain. For instance, if it rains during the procession, the deceased would surely be in heaven, which is good, because they also believed that rain falling into an open grave meant a family member would die that same year. A clap of thunder after a burial meant the arrival of the deceased in heaven as well. Imagine if you had all 3. And of course, large drops of rain hitting you at any time meant someone just died. Dreams have long held the interest of those who would interpret their meanings. To Victorians, there were a few things that they considered clear signs of something else. Dreaming about yourself was considered bad in general. But if there was a birth involved, it meant a coming death of you or someone you knew. Other terrible omens included black cats, of course, sitting on beds, dogs scratching up floors, sharks following a ship, a white horse or a rabbit, a cow giving birth to twins, owls on rooftops, and bees swarming in a rotting tree. If you had any of these, you better start praying. Now, to this very day, every culture has their own practices. When a Victorian died, they would be laid out, most likely at home, and watched over every minute until the burial, hence the term wake. They did this to ensure the person was actually dead. The body was then carried out feet first to keep the spirit from looking back into the house and inviting another family member to follow him or her. Family photos were turned down to avoid possession too. Heads were buried facing west, and feet were buried east for the coming judgment. Funeral attire and coffins for deceased children were white, something we still see to this day. Umbrellas opened inside will invite evil spirits to plague you for 7 years, or worse yet, ready for this, will make the spot the site of a future murder. Walking under a ladder invited misfortune, and that was possibly a leftover of the hangman's ladder. And of course, stepping on a crack invites a cracked back for your mom. Some of these are still repeated today, though probably with less seriousness as they fade into obscurity. These are ones we're all familiar with today. Black cats are the first, of course, as they were considered unlucky and evil. This was a leftover from pagan beliefs that they could shapeshift and were witches. Black dogs were also bad because of old myths around hellhounds. Gray horses with hooves turned backwards, I don't know how many of those there were also a concern as they could be an evil fairy. Sparrows were believed to carry souls to heaven, so killing one was a sure way to get haunted. Owls perching in your window was a sign of impending death, as was seeing 6 crows. Bats were the messengers of the devil. All bad things to see. It was commonplace to see funeral processions on a daily basis. If you found yourself out and about and running into one coming down the street, you better turn around and hightail it out of there. If that just wasn't possible, you had to hold on to a button until the procession passed. If you hear 3 knocks and no one is around making them, then someone close to you has just died or will die. Now, in the paranormal world, it is still observed in haunted places and seen as mocking the Trinity. Preparing for a funeral or burial can be tough. Back then, once you received your black-bordered funeral invitation, you dressed in black and were not supposed to wear anything new, especially shoes. Speaking ill of the dead meant that you would be haunted by them or visited with bad luck. Tie some white ribbons onto everything, leaving the house to protect against death coming to your family next. And also, it was important to shake hands with the gravedigger for the same reason. It's considered good luck. Finally, number 13, Friday the 13th. The number 13 was considered unlucky, as it was the number of the Last Supper and the number of the day the Knights Templar were arrested. It was also associated with a Loki story that brought down the Norse gods. They considered it unlucky to have 13 guests at a dinner table. The number exists in stark contrast to the wholesome and much-used number 12, related to everything from the clock to the apostles to the months of the year, and so on. Friday was considered unlucky due to Jesus' death on Good Friday. Again, the Knights of Templar being arrested and wiped out on a Friday the 13th, and a few English authors reinforcing it in literature. It also was the hangman's day of choice until the 20th century. The two were combined into an overall unlucky pairing during the Victorian era, and we are still dealing with it to this very day. We are finally at the end of this interesting and, dare I say, bizarre list. How many of these do you recognize? Which ones are new? Let us know in the comments, and see you next week.